My sister-in-law smirked as she waved the servants toward the kitchen. "That's where the help eats," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I just smiled, pulled out my phone, and said the 6 words that made my brother drop his champagne glass. Cancel the $50 million contract. 5 years earlier, I was working 18-hour days in a cramped office above a dry cleaner, building something from nothing. My investment firm existed mostly on paper and determination then, just me, a borrowed desk, and a vision that kept me awake most nights. The scent of industrial cleaning fluid would drift up through the floorboards, mixing with the aroma of instant coffee that had become my primary food group. David called on a Tuesday. My brother's voice cracked through the phone like he was 16 again, asking Mom to bail him out of detention. "Mia, I'm in trouble. Real trouble this time." I'd heard variations of this plea throughout our lives. David had a gift for finding the deep end of any pool and jumping in head first. But this time was different. This time, he had an idea worth drowning for. His startup, a revolutionary approach to sustainable packaging, had potential. Real potential. The kind that made my investor instincts sharpen like a blade. But every legitimate firm had turned him down. His credit was shot. His reputation in tatters from a previous venture that had imploded spectacularly. "I just need someone to believe in me," he said. "One chance, that's all." I believed in the idea. I believed in the market need. What I wasn't sure about was David. "I can't just write you a check," I told him. "But there might be another way." That's how Meridian Holdings was born. A shell company. Clean papers, anonymous investors. I funneled my firm's resources through 3 different entities before the money reached David's accounts. To him, to everyone, I was just his sister, who worked in finance and lived quietly in a 1-bedroom apartment across town. The anonymity was intentional. I'd learned early that family and money made a toxic combination. Better to let David succeed or fail on his own merits, with my help invisible in the background. What I didn't anticipate was how completely he would embrace that invisibility. As his company grew, David transformed. The grateful brother who had called me in desperation became someone I barely recognized at family dinners. He spoke of his vision and his backers with the confidence of someone who had pulled himself up by his own bootstraps. He never mentioned the $50 million in seed funding that had kept his company alive through its first 3 critical years. I told myself it didn't matter. This wasn't about credit or recognition. This was about family. Then he married Vanessa. She was everything I wasn't. Loud where I was quiet, flashy where I was understated, certain where I preferred to listen. She came from what she called old money, though anyone who actually knew old money could tell it was barely old enough to vote. Her family had made their fortune in strip malls and self-storage units, but she wore their nouveau rich status like designer armor. "Your sister's so humble," she would say at family gatherings, the word dripping with false sympathy. "It's sweet how she's content with so little." David would laugh along, never correcting her assumptions, never mentioning that I worked in investment capital, never wondering how I afforded my simple life without ever seeming to struggle. I watched him change, gathering confidence and status like trophies. He moved into a mansion in the hills, started wearing $1,000 suits, spoke at industry conferences about entrepreneurship and vision. The company I had quietly saved became his personal success story. Still, I said nothing. Family meant accepting people as they were, even when they forgot who they used to be. The celebration party was supposed to be about the company's latest contract, a partnership that would triple their revenue and establish them as an industry leader. Vanessa had insisted on hosting it at their home, turning what should have been a professional milestone into a social spectacle. I almost didn't attend. "You have to come," David had said during his obligatory phone call. "Family should be there." Family. The word felt different in his mouth now, carrying less warmth and more obligation. I arrived in my usual understated style, a simple black dress, minimal jewelry, driving the reliable sedan I'd owned for 6 years. The valet looked confused when I handed him my keys, clearly expecting someone more significant. The house blazed with light and laughter. Vanessa had spared no expense, transforming their home into something from a magazine spread. Ice sculptures, live musicians, servers weaving through crowds of industry executives and social climbers. I recognized several faces from business magazines and conference circuits, people I'd negotiated with through intermediaries, people who would have taken my calls immediately if they'd known who I was. Instead, I was invisible. Again. "Oh, you made it," Vanessa said when she spotted me, her voice carrying that particular tone reserved for unexpected disappointments. "How? Nice." She was radiant in a way that money could buy. Professionally styled, draped in designer silk, every detail calculated for maximum impact. I watched her eyes scan my appearance, cataloging each modest choice like evidence for some unspoken case. "David's around somewhere," she continued, already looking past me toward more important guests. "Probably talking business with the real players." The dismissal was casual, practiced. I was used to it by now. I found a quiet corner near the kitchen, nursing a glass of wine and observing. It was fascinating, really, watching the social dynamics play out, the way conversations shifted based on perceived status, the way people leaned in when David spoke, hungry for proximity to success. He was in his element, gesticulating as he told the story of his company's rise. I caught fragments of his narrative. The struggles, the breakthroughs, the vision that had driven him forward when everyone else had given up. Everyone except the anonymous investors who had believed in him from the beginning, of course. But that part never made it into his stories. "Mia!" David spotted me and waved me over with the enthusiasm of someone performing for an audience. "Come meet some people." I approached the circle of executives and investors, recognizing several faces from industry publications. These were serious players, the kind of people who could make or break companies with a single decision. "This is my sister," David announced. "She works in finance." The way he said it, like he was trying to make something small sound bigger, made my chest tighten. Around us, polite smiles appeared and quickly faded as the group assessed my relevance to their world. "What kind of finance?" asked a woman I recognized as the CEO of a major venture capital firm. "Investment management," I replied simply. "Oh, like at a bank?" Vanessa had materialized beside us, her voice bright with fake interest. "That's so practical." The conversation moved on, flowing around me like water around a stone. I excused myself and retreated to my corner, watching David bask in the attention he'd worked so hard to earn. That's when I overheard them. I was standing near the kitchen entrance when Vanessa's voice carried over the ambient noise. She was talking to a small group of women, her voice pitched low, but not quite low enough. "I feel so sorry for her," she was saying. "David's sister, she's just so pathetic, you know? Still single, still struggling. It's embarrassing, really." One of the other women made a sympathetic sound. "It must be hard for David, having to include her in things like this." "Oh, it is," Vanessa continued. "He's too kind to say anything, but I can tell it bothers him. Here he is, building this empire, and his sister can barely afford to dress appropriately for his success." Laughter rippled through the group, not cruel laughter exactly, but the kind of casual dismissal that somehow felt worse. "I mean, look at her," another voice chimed in, "standing there by herself like some kind of wallflower. It's sad." I set my wineglass down carefully, my hands steady despite the heat rising in my chest. This wasn't shock. I'd suspected their opinions for years. This was something different. This was clarity. I was still processing when I heard David's voice join the conversation. "Who are we talking about?" he asked, and I could hear the smile in his tone. "Your sister," Vanessa replied. "We were just saying how difficult it must be having family who can't quite keep up." There was a pause. A moment where he could have defended me, redirected the conversation, shown even a fragment of loyalty. Instead, he laughed. "Yeah, Mia's always been the quiet one," he said. "Never really figured out how to make something of herself. But hey, that's family, right? You love them anyway." The words hit like physical blows. Not because they were cruel, David wasn't a cruel person, but because they were casual, thoughtless. Because in his mind, I had become someone who deserved pity rather than respect. I walked away from the kitchen, my movements deliberate and calm. No one noticed my departure from the conversation I was never really part of anyway. The party continued around me, a swirl of success and celebration that I now understood I would never truly belong to. Not because I couldn't, but because I had chosen to remain invisible for so long that I had become genuinely unseen. That's when Vanessa made her final mistake. I was standing near the dining room when she approached, her cheeks flushed with wine and confidence. A small group of guests had gathered nearby, and I realized I was about to become entertainment. "Oh, good," she announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "The servers are here for the kitchen duties." She gestured toward me with the casual authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "That's where the help eats," she continued, pointing toward the kitchen with a smile that was meant to look gracious. "Just follow the other staff." The nearby conversations stopped. Several guests turned to watch, their expressions ranging from amusement to secondhand embarrassment. Someone giggled nervously. I looked at Vanessa's face, radiant with the satisfaction of someone who had just established the natural order of things. Then I looked at David, who was standing close enough to have heard, but far enough away to pretend he hadn't. Our eyes met across the room. I saw the moment he realized what his wife had just done, saw the flicker of something that might have been shame across his features. But he didn't move, didn't speak, didn't defend me. That silence told me everything I needed to know. I smiled at Vanessa, a genuine smile, calm and completely without malice. Then I pulled out my phone. The music and laughter continued around me as I stepped onto the terrace, the cool night air a welcome contrast to the heated atmosphere inside. My fingers moved across the phone screen with practiced efficiency. "Margaret, it's Mia." "Mia?" My managing partner's voice was surprised. "Aren't you at some family thing tonight?" "I am. Listen, I need you to cancel the Hartley contract, all of it." There was a pause. I could practically hear Margaret's mental gears turning, trying to process what I'd just said. "The Hartley deal?" "Mia, that's $50 million. We've been working on this for months." "I know. The papers are supposed to be signed Monday. Their entire expansion depends on this funding." "I know," I repeated, my voice steady. "Cancel it." "Can I ask why? This doesn't make sense. The projections are solid. The market analysis it's personal." Another pause. Margaret had worked with me for 3 years. She knew better than to push when I used that tone. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll need to make some calls tonight to stop the wire transfers. The lawyers will want to know. Tell them the investor had concerns about management stability. Keep it vague." "Mia, are you sure about this? Once we pull out, we can't just..." "I'm sure." I ended the call and stood for a moment in the quiet darkness, looking back through the glass doors at the party inside. David was visible in the crowd, laughing at something someone had said, completely unaware that his world had just shifted on its axis. I walked back inside, retrieved my wine glass, and finished what was left. The taste was perfect, rich, complex, expensive. Everything about this evening had been carefully curated to impress. None of it would matter by Monday. I found David near the bar, surrounded by his usual circle of admirers. He was in the middle of another story about vision and perseverance when he spotted me approaching. "There she is," he said with forced joviality. "Mia, we were just talking about..." "I'm heading out," I interrupted gently. "Thank you for inviting me." "Already? But the party's just getting started. I have an early morning." I smiled at the group, nodding politely. "Congratulations on the new contract. I hope everything works out." Something in my tone made David look at me more carefully, but I was already turning away. I had perfected the art of graceful exits years ago. I was halfway to the door when I heard the sound, crystal hitting marble, followed by the sharp intake of several breaths. I didn't turn around. I knew David had dropped his champagne glass, knew he was staring after me with the beginning of understanding creeping across his face, but I also knew it was too late. The call came on Wednesday morning. "Mia. What the hell is happening?" David's voice was strained, higher pitched than usual. "The funding fell through. $50 million just... gone." I was in my office, reviewing portfolios in the quiet hour before my assistant arrived. Through my window, the city was beginning to wake up. Coffee shops opening, people hurrying to jobs that mattered to them. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, my voice genuinely sympathetic. "You don't understand. This wasn't just any deal. This was our expansion funding. We've already committed to new facilities, hired staff, made promises to clients." "That sounds difficult." "Difficult." His laugh had a sharp edge. Mia, my company is gonna collapse. 3 years of work, down the drain, I don't know what I'm going to do. I set down my pen and gave him my full attention. What did your other investors say? That's just it, everyone's spooked now. When the lead investor pulls out at the last minute, it sends a message. Other firms are backing away, asking questions we can't answer. The lead investor? Some holding company called Meridian. We've been working with them for years, but they've always been anonymous. Now they just disappeared. I was quiet for a long moment, listening to my brother's breathing on the other end of the line. David, I said finally. Do you know who owns Meridian Holdings? Some investment group. Why would I know? We've always worked through intermediaries. His voice sharpened with frustration. What does that matter now? I think you should find out. Mia, I don't have time for research projects. I need solutions. He stopped. The silence stretched between us like a held breath. You should find out, I repeated softly. The call ended without goodbye. I knew he would spend the next few hours making desperate phone calls, pulling strings, calling in favors. I knew he would eventually reach the right person, ask the right question, receive the answer that would change everything. I also knew that by the time he did, it would be too late to matter. He appeared at my office on Friday afternoon. I was in a meeting with potential clients, a husband and wife team looking to invest their tech startup windfall, when my assistant knocked and entered with an apologetic expression. I'm sorry to interrupt, but your brother is here. He says it's urgent. I looked at my clients, successful entrepreneurs who understood family obligations, and smiled apologetically. Could we continue this on Monday? I think this might take a while. They gathered their materials with professional grace, and I walked them to the elevator, making the small talk that kept business relationships warm. When I returned to my office, David was standing at my window, staring out at the city skyline. He looked older than he had at the party just 5 days earlier. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his usually perfect hair disheveled. Success, I had learned, was a fragile thing. Nice office, he said without turning around. Much nicer than I expected. Thank you. How long have you had it? About 2 years. He turned to face me then, and I saw that he knew. The knowledge sat in his eyes like a weight he couldn't put down. Meridian Holdings, he said. Your company. One of them. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Jesus, Mia. How long? Since the beginning. The beginning. He sank into one of my client chairs, looking suddenly exhausted. All of it? The seed funding, the Series A, the expansion capital you were supposed to receive Monday. $50 million. Among other investments, yes. He was quiet for several minutes, processing. I could see him working backward through memories, re-examining conversations and assumptions through this new lens. Why? He asked finally. Because you needed help, and I could provide it. No, he shook his head. Why did you cancel it? Why now? I considered several answers. The truth was complicated, layered with years of small disappointments and quiet betrayals, but David was asking for something simpler. Because I realized you didn't see me as family anymore, I said. You saw me as an obligation. That's not. At your party, when your wife told me to eat in the kitchen with the help, you were standing 10 feet away. His face went pale. Mia, I didn't hear? You heard. You just didn't think it was worth responding to. Vanessa was drunk. She didn't mean. She meant exactly what she said, and you let her say it. He leaned forward, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. Please, you don't have to do this. We're family. Are we? The question hung between us like a challenge. I watched him struggle with it. Saw him trying to find the words that would rebuild what had been broken. I know I haven't been. I know I've been focused on the company, on building something. But that doesn't mean I don't care about you. When was the last time you asked about my work? What? My job. My life. When was the last time you showed any interest in who I am beyond being your struggling little sister? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I've been managing over 200 million in assets, I continued. I've helped launch dozens of companies. I've spoken at conferences, been featured in industry publications, built something meaningful from nothing, and you've never once asked about any of it. I didn't know. Because you never asked. The admission settled over him like a weight. I could see him remembering conversations, family dinners, where he had dominated the discussion with his own success while I listened quietly from the sidelines. "I can make this right," he said desperately. "I can give you credit, bring you into the company publicly. We can be partners." "I don't want to be your partner, David." "Then what do you want?" I walked to my desk and picked up a framed photo. Our family at Christmas 3 years ago, back when things were simpler. David was grinning at the camera, his arm around Vanessa, both of them glowing with new success. I was in the background, smiling quietly, content to be invisible. "I want you to understand something," I said, still looking at the photo. "I didn't cancel the funding to punish you. I canceled it because I realized I couldn't trust you. With business, with anything that matters." I set the photo down and looked at him directly. "For 3 years, I've been your silent partner. I've watched you build your reputation on the foundation I provided. And I've been fine with that. But somewhere along the way, you started believing your own story. You started thinking you did it all yourself. Mia. And when you started thinking that, you stopped seeing me as someone capable of building something. I became someone who needed your pity instead of someone who deserved your respect." He was crying now, tears sliding down his cheeks with the kind of helplessness that came from realizing you had lost something irreplaceable. "What can I do?" he whispered. "Tell me what I can do to fix this." I walked around my desk and sat across from him, close enough to see the genuine desperation in his eyes. "Nothing," I said gently. "There's nothing you can do. There has to be something." "David, do you know what I realized at your party? When Vanessa called me help and you said nothing?" He shook his head. "I realized that I had made myself invisible for so long that I had actually disappeared, even to you. That's not true." "It is true, and the fault is partly mine. I chose to stay in the background. I chose anonymity over recognition. But I did it because I trusted you to remember who I was, even if no one else did." "I do remember." "No," I said firmly. "You remember who I used to be. The little sister who needed help, who looked up to you, who was grateful for your attention. You don't know who I am now." I stood up and walked to the door, holding it open. "I think you should go," I said. "You have a company to save." He didn't move immediately. "Is there really nothing I can do? You can learn to see people for who they actually are instead of who you think they should be." "Mia." "Goodbye, David." He walked to the door, pausing beside me for a moment as if he wanted to say something else. But there was nothing left to say. We both knew it. After he left, I sat in my office as the sun set over the city, thinking about family and trust and the weight of invisible support. My phone buzzed with messages, Margaret updating me on new investment opportunities, clients confirming meetings, colleagues sharing industry news. I had built something real, something that mattered. Something that would continue long after David's company had faded into memory. And for the first time in years, I didn't have to share it with anyone who couldn't see it clearly. 6 months later, I was featured on the cover of Forbes, The Quiet Power: How One Woman Built an Investment Empire in Plain Sight. Read the headline, accompanied by a photo of me in my office, surrounded by the evidence of what I had actually built. The article detailed my firm's track record, the companies I'd helped launch, the returns I'd generated for my investors. It mentioned Meridian Holdings and several other shell companies I'd used for strategic investments, painting a picture of sophisticated financial architecture that had been hiding in plain sight for years. David's company had survived, barely. He'd managed to secure emergency funding from a smaller firm, though at terms that significantly diluted his ownership. The last I'd heard, he was still working 18-hour days, trying to rebuild what had been lost. I hadn't spoken to him since that afternoon in my office. The Forbes article had generated significant attention in my industry, leading to speaking engagements and new investment opportunities. I'd moved my firm to a larger office space, hired additional staff, and begun working with clients whose names regularly appeared in business headlines. That evening, I attended a gala for women in finance, one of those events where successful people gathered to celebrate success and network strategically. I'd been invited to give the keynote address, something that would have been unthinkable just a year earlier. The power of invisibility, I told the audience, is that it allows you to see clearly. When people don't think you're watching, they show you who they really are. The speech was well received, generating the kind of industry buzz that translated into business opportunities. Afterward, during the cocktail reception, I found myself surrounded by people who wanted to discuss investment strategies and market trends. Mia Chen? A woman approached me, her face familiar though I couldn't immediately place her. I'm Jennifer Walsh. I was at David's celebration party last spring. I remembered her then, one of the women who had been standing with Vanessa during that conversation in the kitchen. Of course, I said politely. How are you? I have to say, I had no idea who you were that night when I read the Forbes article. She shook her head, laughing nervously. I felt like such an idiot. Don't worry about it. But I do worry about it. I mean, here you were, this incredibly successful investor, and we all just ignored you. I sipped my wine, watching her struggle with the social mathematics of having misjudged someone so completely. It happens, I said simply. I keep thinking about that party, about how awkward it must have been for you. Vanessa was so... well, you know how she can be. I remember. I heard about what happened with David's company, the funding that fell through. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Was that you? The anonymous investor who pulled out? I looked at her directly, letting her see the answer in my eyes without saying it aloud. Oh my God, she breathed. It was you. I should go, I said, setting down my empty glass. Early morning tomorrow. Wait. She caught my arm as I turned to leave. I'm sorry, about that night, about how I'm genuinely sorry. Thank you, I said, and meant it. Apologies were rare in my experience, and this one felt genuine. As I walked away, I realized I felt no satisfaction in her discomfort, no pleasure in her belated recognition. The quiet victory wasn't about making people feel bad for underestimating me. It was about no longer needing their estimation at all. They saw a servant because I stayed quiet. They never asked who signed the checks. Now they know. And I've never been more at peace, because I didn't need to destroy them. They did that all on their own. I think about that sometimes, sitting in my office as the city hums with ambition and possibility below. David built his success on a foundation I provided, then forgot I existed. Vanessa dismissed me as irrelevant, never wondering how someone so supposedly insignificant could afford to exist comfortably without apparent effort. The truth is, I could have spoken up at any time, could have corrected their assumptions, claimed credit for my contributions, demanded recognition for my role in David's success. But I chose silence. And in that silence, I learned something valuable about the people around me. I learned that my brother was someone who could forget the hand that helped him up once he no longer needed it. I learned that his wife was someone who measured worth by appearance rather than substance. I learned that many of the people in their social circle were equally shallow, equally quick to dismiss anyone who didn't fit their narrow definition of success. These weren't moral failings exactly. They were simply truths about human nature, revealed in the space between what people say and what they do. When I finally withdrew my support, I wasn't punishing David for his ingratitude. I was simply declining to continue enabling someone who had demonstrated that he couldn't see past his own reflection. The money I had invested in his company found other homes. Startups led by founders who understood that success was collaborative, that behind every individual achievement was a network of support that deserved acknowledgement. My firm continued to grow, attracting clients who valued strategic thinking over social performance. I spoke at conferences about the importance of diverse investment portfolios and patient capital. I mentored young women entering finance, teaching them that power exercised quietly was often more effective than power announced loudly. And sometimes, late at night when the city grew quiet, I would think about family and loyalty and the difference between being invisible and being overlooked. I had chosen invisibility as a strategy. It had allowed me to build something real while others were distracted by appearances. But David had overlooked me, which was different. He had stopped seeing me as a person with agency and capability, reducing me to a role in his personal narrative. The distinction mattered. I don't regret the choice I made that night on the terrace, phone in hand, speaking the words that would reshape both our futures. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that someone I loved had changed so completely that preserving my own dignity required walking away from his. But I don't regret the walking away itself, because in the end, the quiet victory wasn't about revenge or recognition. It was about refusing to make myself smaller so that someone else could feel bigger. It was about understanding that true power doesn't need to announce itself. It simply acts, with precision and purpose, when action is required. They saw a servant because I stayed quiet. They never asked who signed the checks. Now they know, and I've never been more at peace.